This is the Muddy Brook Wildlife Management Area in Hardwick, Massachusetts. Publicly owned by the citizens of Massachusetts, this area is under the care and control of the state's Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. Dense, moist, verdant, self-sufficient, it was recovering, maturing, a mix of conifers and hardwoods, pine, hemlock, oak, birch, cherry, linden, ironwood, young chestnut. Many trees were more than 100 years old. It was full of life, home to that great biodiversity that thrives in an undisturbed, unmanaged forest. It had been cleared in the 19th century to create pasture land, but then was abandoned and slowly returned to woodland in the 20th century, now hosting a vast array of birds, reptiles, amphibians, insects, and mammals. This is how the forest used to be. Then, in 2014, the cutting began.
The Division of Fisheries and Wildlife sold the timber rights to private forestry companies who clear-cut hundreds of acres, leaving only some relatively young oaks. This is state-sponsored logging on an industrial scale. The state claims that this is part of a plan to restore a pine barrens, which they say originally existed here, but there is little or no evidence to support that notion. And if this artificial barrens is to endure, the state will require regular logging and/or burning, along with a vacuum-like removal of any biomass that accumulates on the barren's floor. A few animal species will thrive here, but many more have been driven out. Still, the Division of Fisheries and Wildlife is pleased. Hunters, they boast, will enjoy unobstructed shooting. Massachusetts law specifically says, quote, "It shall be a condition of each contract for the cutting and sale of timber that clear-cutting timber on lands managed by the division is specifically prohibited," unquote. Did the state really want to create an unnatural, impoverished environment? Or did they deliberately destroy a healthy forest in order to support the forestry industry? All that was ripped from the forest has been changed into money. The forest, which could have cleaned our atmosphere and filtered our water, is gone. The forest that provided habitat for so many plants and animals is gone. What wasn't sawed out for lumber was likely ground into wood chips. Wood chips, also called biomass, is one of the dirtiest of fuels, more polluting than any fossil fuel, dirtier even than coal. For at least the next 10 years, this clear-cut will release more carbon than it captures, as the remaining biomass in roots and soil continues to decay. What once was a healthy carbon sink, reliably removing toxic waste, is now acting like a backed-up, broken sewer pipe, spewing poison into our overburdened sky. Around the globe, forests are disappearing. In Massachusetts, we lose to development more than 13 acres of privately owned undeveloped land every day, almost 5,000 acres a year. And those figures do not take into account the deforestation of public lands, like these here. Even if left undisturbed, it will take almost a century for this forest to return to its previous condition. We are in a climate emergency. Elevated levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere are responsible for much of global warming. There is now 30% more carbon in the atmosphere than there was 70 years ago. Scientists agree that we have very little time before irreversible catastrophe overtakes our planet. We have one overarching necessary task. We must clean the atmosphere. We must capture and store as much atmospheric carbon as possible, as fast as possible. Forests store enormous amounts of carbon. Forests contain about 80% of all plant biomass on the entire planet. And northeastern forests have the potential to store between 2 and 4 times more carbon than they do now. Trees, their roots and the soil that is their home, sequester carbon most effectively as intact and unmanaged forests. Even the mildest timber harvesting results in a crippled carbon uptake system. The simplest, cheapest, and most certain way to begin to clean our atmosphere is to protect our publicly owned forests, our state forests. To leave them alone, to let them grow, unmanaged, unimpeded. To simply let them be. We have only to let them be. The climate emergency is now. Devastating changes are becoming irreversible. Much of the planet may become uninhabitable. Millions of species are disappearing. Saving intact public forests is the simplest and most economical way to combat carbon emissions. Yet clear-cutting and deforestation continue unabated. This must change. We must demand a moratorium on logging on all Massachusetts state land. We cannot allow ourselves to be silenced, to be defanged. We have the responsibility and we have the right to make this demand. Phone and email Governor Baker. Sign the petition supporting a moratorium on Massachusetts state land.
Stop the destruction. Save our forests. And they will save us.
I am Mother Earth, and I approve of this message.